opposite for you this morning. Investment grade rating for Indonesia over the last few weeks. That's put the country back on the radar screen for a lot of fund managers. You must be very excited about that.
Yes, we are. And it's on the back of, I think, a number of things that we've done somewhat right. From a fiscal standpoint, we've trimmed down debt. It's looking better than ever, 23% debt to GDP ratio. And we've been managing the budget deficit at about 1.5% every year for the last few years. And investments have been very robust, real sector investments, Dave. We had a record year last year. FDI went up by 25%, consecutively for the last 3 years. And total capital formation remains at 31-32% of the GDP. So with that and domestic consumption, which has been very robust, making up close to 60% of the GDP, I think have allowed for the economy to remain somewhat unscathed from some of the external shocks that we might have seen the last few years. So I think we're on the right track, but there's still some stuff that we've got to fix.
Now, you have a background in finance before moving into this government position, so I feel comfortable asking you a few more investment-related questions.
Okay.
All the countries in Southeast Asia are competing for international capital at the moment,
right,
whether it's FDI or whether it's some other form of investment.
Right.
What makes Indonesia stand out, and which sectors are people going to make money in this year if they come to your country?
Well, the obvious would have been anything that's close to mining and natural resources, which would have included palm oil and all that, and also infrastructure. But infrastructure has not been as quick and as fast as we might have wanted it to be. But I think we've taken the right steps to accelerate it in the next coming years. I think those, on top of the usual consumers, would be the good, picks. I'm not a stock analyst, but the stock market went up by 12% last year. I think there's still quite a number of things that are still very attractively valued. Should be good. Yeah.
And as we look at regional trends at the moment and news flow, there are a couple of things going on. We've got the Bank of Japan now on the case, it seems, to weaken the yen.
Right.
And the Chinese economy looks like it's alive and it's picking up.
Yeah.
I say that slightly in jest, of course, because
right,
they're still probably going to do 6, 7, 8% growth this year.
Yep.
But what are the implications of those two trends in those regional giants for Indonesia?
Well, the China story, I think, will be very good for us because they consume and they demand a lot of our natural resources, and that's why China has become our largest trading partner. Japan is also the second largest trading partner, so they're weakening the yen. I think is going to create, entail a bit more competitiveness for Japan in terms of their exports. Having said that, they still require a lot of our stuff, which I think will still remain competitive. So China's growth rate of 7.5% to 8.5% in 2013, I think, would be good for Indonesia.
I've got to pick a bone with you. ASEAN Free Trade Zone.
Right.
Indonesia not ready? Why not?
Oh, we're ready. We've signed the free trade agreements with the 6 strategic partners of Japan, China, India, Australia, and New Zealand, and Korea. We're actually broadening and deepening the free trade agreements into a much more comprehensive set, inclusive of investment thesis and also capacity building, which we're calling the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. That will be, I think, hand in hand with the culmination of the ASEAN Economic Community, which will take place by the end of 2015. So that will, I think, make ASEAN more competitive than ever.
Indonesia, to a certain extent, is vulnerable to what happens in the United States with the debt ceiling, what
right,
happens in Europe with resolving its ongoing debt challenges. How comfortable are you feeling about the outlook for full year 2013 on some of these broader macro headwinds that could set you back on some of the ambitions you have?
Europe, we're not exposed too much directly, but indirectly we are, because we're sending goods and services to many parts of Asia Pacific, which will ultimately send their goods and services into Europe and also into the U.S. The U.S. we're slightly more exposed, so anything from a fiscal monetary standpoint that affects the U.S. I think has a more direct impact on Indonesia. So we're hopeful that whatever reposturing that's taking place in Europe and in the U.S. Would mean, you know, good things for us in Indonesia. But again, I think our exposure is far more with respect to Asia Pacific.
Peter Voser was just up from Royal
Yep.
Dutch Shell. I lived in Asia through much of the 90s, and one of the stories then that was a real tragedy was just the way the energy sector was treated in Indonesia and the failure really to exploit the natural gas reserves that the country has. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that story may be changing now that obviously we have a government focused on clamping down on corruption, dealing with some of the old problems that existed?
Well, I think the concern with Indonesia for long has been with respect to execution. I think there's a huge potential. I think we've fixed a lot of things. And speaking of corruption, we've put thousands of people into jail the last few years. And that, I think, has helped create a perception and a reality that Indonesia is a good place to put money into. And I think the oil and gas sector has to be looked at in a holistic sense, in the sense that it's not just oil, but it's also gas and coal. If you take a look at the total energy mix, it's about 6 to 7 million barrel equivalent per day, which is a far greater number than whatever we had 5 to 10 years ago. I think the gas exploration and exploitation have quite significantly gone up. Oil is the one that I think requires a little more attention. The production per day has come down a bit, but we've been able to compensate that with other mixes of the energy, which actually have greater pricing capabilities.
Sir, it's been a pleasure catching up with you. Thanks very much for it's very different to the Indonesian climate.
It's not exactly tropical.
I have to say, I think I'd rather be there than here at the moment. But there you go. Beautiful backdrop for us. Gita Wirjawan, then, the Minister of Trade for Indonesia. Martin Sen will be up with us in just a moment. We're going to talk insurance sector trends. Let's take the break. You're watching Squawk Box. We're coming to you live from the World Economic Forum in Davos.